Hey, welcome to today's video. I'm Rick Chapo with DMCAAgentService.com, and we are circling back to the EU Copyright Directive. And yes, you might be sick of hearing about it, but we have some interesting developments. So the EU Copyright Directive contained a particular article, Article 13, that was very controversial. And so what we're talking about today is the EU comes clean on Article 13. Filters are required. So what's with all the filtering? Well, Article 13 said basically that if a platform moves a substantial amount of data, then it must filter the content being moved, the data being moved, and remove any infringing content. And this language was troubling to a lot of different people because it suggested that a lot of material that would otherwise be allowed under free speech would be removed. And the reason being that these are private companies. We're really focusing on the large American tech companies, Facebook, YouTube, Google, these kinds of things. And because they're private companies, well, they're for profit. They have to show certain revenue returns each quarter, or their stock is going to crash and they're going to get sued by their shareholders and so on and so forth. And so the concern is, well, they don't want to be sued, so they're going to create very strict filters. And really clamp down on the exchange of information. And should a piece of content have anything that even remotely looks like it's infringing, well, it would probably be filtered out. And so that would end up removing, perhaps news stories where there are quotes from an article or quotes that somebody said. A lot of those kinds of things. Now, of course, there's also the grand concern that it would get rid of memes. And while most people laugh about that, it actually points out something serious, which is, a meme is typically a piece of copyrighted content that is then used as a piece of fair use because it's turned into a parody of some sort. Well, how does a computer program figure that out? I mean, most judges have difficulties with it at this point. So how are we going to create some kind of a program? And we've seen one effort made with the Content ID system on YouTube. Google's pumped between $80 and $100 million into it, and it works okay, not great. But it's also pretty liberal. What happens when they really clamp down, on the parameters of that program? Well, things could get ugly. So what happened was essentially it became apparent the EU Copyright Directive was not going to pass, primarily because of Article 13. And so the proponents of that article started watering down the language. The word filter is nowhere to be found now. Instead, we get things like best efforts to evaluate the content and, these kinds of vague statements that really mean nothing. But if you read the text as a whole, you can still see the only way anybody can comply with it is to filter their content. But we were told by various groups, no, that's not the case. And if you read that into the text, you're being hysterical and blah, 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 blah. And so what's happened now is the EU Copyright Directive passed on March 26, 2019 by a slim 70 votes. And, now that it is binding, a lot of the parties are starting to tell the truth. And filters are going to be required. So the first thing to understand is Article 13 that we've talked about for years was actually renumbered to Article 17 at the last minute under the new EU Copyright Directive, the latest version. So if you hear Article 17 or Article 13, they're talking about the same thing. And nonetheless, we are still seeing, some of these people really start to show their true colors. Perhaps the most infamous is Günter Oettinger. He's a German EU rep. And prior to the EU vote, or to the Copyright Directive vote, Günter assured us that there were going to be no filtering requirements. And in fact, anybody who said that they were off their rocker. You'd have to be an idiot to read those into the text. All these people were just out of their minds. Well, a mere 2 weeks after the vote, Günter's changing his tune. And you can see the quote right there. I'm convinced that the guideline sets relatively clear guidelines. Okay. As things stand, upload filters cannot be completely avoided. So here we go. We're going to get filter creep in another 2 weeks or maybe a month. It'll be, well, under current technology, unfortunately, we need filters. And then 6 months down the line, it'll be, well, obviously everybody meant filters. Welcome to politics. The French, of course, have been very, very open about their desire for filters because they do truly hate the U.S. Tech companies. They really do. enjoy going after them. Let's say it's a form of sport in France. And so they have announced that they are going to rush through a law incorporating the concepts of Article 13, and it will include a mission to promote and supervise content recognition technologies. Content recognition technologies. Focus on those three words. What is a content recognition technology? It's a filter. And they're not only going to promote these filters, they're going to supervise them, meaning YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, you better create these filters because we're going to be all over you if you don't. And so, again, here we see the truth being laid bare, if you will, as the politicians do this. So is this a bait and switch situation? Yes, of course it is. But this happens all the time in politics. And quite frankly, the groups that voted for copyright directive that were not originally going to do so, they got something in return. It's horse trading, as I like to say. For instance, we know full well, it's pretty well known that the French worked to deal with the Germans. So the Germans were hesitant at first, and the French said, well, if you vote for the EU copyright directive, vote in favor of it, we will stop objecting to the Russian oil pipeline that you want. Well, that's exactly what's happening. So you see these trade-offs all the time, and whatever your feelings may be towards the Germans and the French, don't get too righteous, because whatever country you're in is also doing it. The U.S. does it, the U.K., the Italians, so on and so forth. So what's the next step? Well, now the brawl will actually drop down a level. Each member state will need to enact a new law incorporating the concepts of the copyright directive. And so this whole blow up will just now transfer to each member state, and you'll see lobbying and screaming and yelling. Some countries have indicated that they are obviously going to pass very strict versions of Article 13. So you see this with France. You see other groups where it's going to be a bit more muddled, probably Germany, the Netherlands. And then you see areas where they've already said that they're barely going to pass anything and probably not enforce it. That would include countries like Poland and Italy. So we're hardly anywhere near the end point of this, but I thought it'd be interesting to let you know, just how much of all the grandstanding beforehand was nonsense, which I think anybody who has any experience in the political arena, probably expected to be the case. And so that's where things stand now. So thanks for watching today's video. Have yourself a good one.